have a big supply of bone nuts and saddles. I like to use bone for the saddles. I do think the choice of saddle material has more of an impact on the sound of the guitar than your choice of bridge pins or nut material. But the strings are vibrating when they're in contact with the saddle, and I've actually a couple times gone from bone to corian or bone to ivory, and I can hear a difference. It's hard to really quantify or describe adequately. I know there are thousands of opinions on the internet and probably thousands of descriptions of the sound differences, but I typically use bone. This saddle blank is too long for the bridge slot, and it's also too wide. It's about 150 thousandths of an inch wide right now. I have to get it down to a little under 140 thousandths. So I'm going to do that on the belt sander, and once I get it down to the right thickness, then I'll work on getting it to the right length and the right height for the initial stringing up. Saddle fits nicely in the slot. It's not a tight fit. Tight fits aren't a great idea because then you can't have any expansion of the ebony bridge, like with a climate change. Well, if it does expand, you have to worry about the saddle slot cracking, or you have to worry about the bridge cracking. So it's not a loose fit at all. There's no wiggle room from front to back. So now I'm going to just trim it to the length of the saddle slot and put a little bit of a crown on it. I'll take some measurements just to get a rough idea of how tall I want it to be. After the strings are on for a day or so, I'll adjust that. And I'll do the final polishing. One more thing, this saddle slot, like I said, it's almost 140 thousandths of an inch wide, and I like to do that when I can, because the more width you have in this saddle, the more you can do fine adjustments with the intonation. So if I need to compensate for a certain string being out of tune, I can make more fine adjustments with a wider saddle than I can with a narrow saddle. There's the roughed out saddle. I know the action is going to be high. I'm going to have to take more off of this after I string it up. But I try not to get too close to the final height until I've got the strings on the guitar. So this is good enough that I'll be able to play it for a couple of minutes, but I will definitely want to make some adjustments. Also, normally I would cut those little slots in the bridge in front of the bridge pins before I string the guitar up, but this guitar is a little different because of the variable scale and the slanting of the bridge. I don't want to try to get the angle just right on the slots. So I'm going to put the strings on, and they will leave marks right where they're pulling on the bridge, and then I'll take the pins out and cut the slots right where the strings tell me they're going to be. Now I'm going to sand down the nut to the thickness I need it to be so it fits in the nut slot, and put some grooves in where the 6 strings are going to go. I like bone for nuts usually because it's quite durable. Wood and plastics tend to wear out quickly, and the slots get deep and you get open fret or open string buzzes. I think bone lasts a lot longer. I don't think it has much impact on the sound of the guitar, other than if you've got a plastic nut and the slots get too deep and you get string buzzes. But the nut material itself, the only place it could possibly have any impact would be on an open string. Once you fret a string, it doesn't matter if the nut is made of plastic or rubber or solid gold. All it's doing is holding the string in proper alignment. So I don't put a lot of stock in nut material other than its durability. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the saddle slot. I'll get the thickness right and then rough out the height, and then I'll figure out the string slots. The nut fits in the slot, and now I'm going to rough out the height. I find that if I use one of my rulers and then one of my other rulers stacked on top of each other and make a pen mark, that gives me a pretty good starting point for the height of the saddle. That's about where I'm going to want the bottom of the string slot. So I'm going to file this down so that it's just a little higher than the pen mark. And when I cut the string slots, I'll go right to the top of that pen line. I used this ruler to mark the centers of the strings where I wanted them to be, wherever it is. And normally I cut the slots straight back on the nut, but again, this guitar is a little different. The nut is angled, so if I had cut the slots straight back, then the strings would go off at strange angles to the tuners. They wouldn't be consistent from one string slot to the next either. So what I did, I put the nut in the slot, and I used a straight edge and just traced from the front of each mark that I made to the inside aspect of each of the tuner holes. And that's how I came up with these lines that are going off to each of the tuners. So that'll be the pattern I follow for making the nut slots. It really doesn't, it's not critical because the way the nut is profiled, hardly any of the string actually goes into the slot other than the very leading edge, which of course is all important. But now I can use my set of nut files and cut the slots just the right diameter for each string. I'm not going to show all of this because it's quite tedious, but the idea is to just use the right diameter file, or right width file, and file the slot. As I said, I'm going down to the depth of the pen mark that I made earlier. I initially do every one of them with the thinnest diameter, and then increase the diameter as appropriate for each string. But this thin one helps me hit the pencil mark exactly right. Okay, so now that's my treble string. That's just about right. And now get a slightly thicker one for the B string. And thicker still for the G, and so forth. Okay, so that's good enough to start. The slots are just about to the pencil mark. So I'll put this in, get the tuners on the guitar probably tomorrow, and put the strings on, and then just like I'm planning to adjust the saddle, I am also planning to have to adjust the nut to get the string height just right. But this is good enough to get me started.